So it's really been a joy to move here to Oskaloosa and to acclimate to the culture here. And one of the things that me and my family especially enjoy is the square. You know, we don't really have a lot of squares back home. Some towns have them, but many don't. It's just not a feature of every single town like it is out here in the Midwest. I mean, even the tiniest town has a square. And what's always right next to the square? So this is just a rhetorical question. How many of you are observant about what's always next to the square, no matter what town in Iowa you go to? The courthouse. It's probably actually that the square is next to the courthouse, really. But those two things are related. This place of public community events and also legal matters, they're all combined in our culture too. And so my daughter, she loves to come to the square. She loves to smell the flowers and run around Chief Mahaska's statue and introduce herself to every dog and dog owner that happens by. You know, she loves the square, and we love it too. And it's just a natural gathering place where you can come and meet with people. And it's also a natural place for big transactions to take place. And so in our story so far, we've seen really two public places in village life. We've seen the threshing floor, which was similar. It was a place where you could come and thresh grain, but it was more than just a grain processing facility. It was a place where they had to have community festivals and all sorts of things back in the day. And so here we find our story at another place that's public and open, the city gates. And so the city gates would be like a combination of the square and the main gate into the city. You know, only rich people today live in a gated community. But back in the day, all the villages had walls around them to protect them from invaders. And so the city gates were a place where everyone would have to come in and go out. And it was a natural place for sort of the same things that happen at the square as well as business transactions. It was just a normal feature of ancient Middle Eastern life. And so you would have to walk past the square in order to get to work every day. Every single person would only be able to come through this gate and they'd walk around the gate out into their fields and probably be on the other side of the wall. And so it would be natural for Boaz to be waiting for this guy at the gate and to find him pretty easily and call a meeting, so to speak. That's just a normal feature of life. And so, we think it's weird that Boaz would come and he would kind of scoop up all these people and call a meeting during their morning commute. That's actually a normal occurrence. That's actually something that would always happen. And so after the harvest is over, as people are finally settling down after working all their grain and everything, this would be really the first time that business could be handled like this. What to do with this land that Naomi has. And so after the hurry and the hustle and bustle of the harvest, people would find themselves, calling these meetings often. And so there's definitely a part of the story that seems natural to them, and it should seem natural to us too, because these sort of things still happen today, just in a different way. And so, it's easy for us to see what happens here and look at it as if Boaz was purchasing a wife. I think that's something that, where are the women of this story? This is a really defining moment for them, and here they are missing from this scene. And it's just the men who are the ones that are deciding their fates. And it's hard for us, I think, as modern people to hear this part of the story and to think about what it means. Because we like our women to be liberated. We like our culture is radically different. But here in this time, it was just a different place and a different time. And this love story happens in this setting. They don't gloss over those details for us. If you've been wondering, perhaps the whole time, why the name of the series was A Ruthless Redemption, this is really the scene that I got the name from. Boaz kind of corners this guy, and he puts him in a situation where he has to give him Ruth, basically. We talked about this is a love story, but also there's a lot going on here. There's land rights that hang in the balance of this love story. And so this is an ancient Near Eastern place, and what is really crucial in this setting is not only land, but also heirs. And so This isn't just a typical Cinderella story that you can just easily grasp and follow without understanding that there is land rights at work here. There's wealth at play. And so as I mentioned before, land redemption works a lot like the game Monopoly that we play. You know, when you absorb someone in the game of Monopoly, you also have to buy back all of their debt. And that's a part of this story. And that's what this kinsman redeemer thing is all about. It's about paying back the debts on this land so that the next generation can have a fresh start and be able to not start in poverty, but start with the land. That would be the way that you produce your food and your money and your income. Without land, you wouldn't have any income at all. And so this is a way of preserving for the next generation the land that God had handed down to these tribes and passed from family member to family member. It doesn't mean that people couldn't abuse these laws or try to use them to take advantage of widows like Ruth and Naomi. But these laws were created so that there would be an act of mercy, that people would pull people back up from this desperate situation and give them a fresh start. And so, as you absorb someone else's land, you might find yourself, just like in the game of Monopoly, nearly broke yourself. And that's kind of what's going on here. So God gave these laws called Levirate laws, the marriage laws, to protect people, to protect the widow and the orphan, and to allow them a way out of their poverty. And so the exception of this Monopoly analogy it'd be like the game of Monopoly, but when someone went down, there's no winner. You know, you would pay back their debt and you would give them back their stuff. You wouldn't get to keep any of it. That's how the law was really supposed to work. That's why they had to create laws to make people do this, because it wasn't just something that would benefit you. And so close family members would make sacrifices in order to continue this handing down of land given by God to the next generation. And they'd be able to have a fresh start and earning potential and a way forward from their poverty. And so, if you've ever, so anyway, Boaz is kind of ruthless here. He's come, he's kind of cornered this guy and brought witnesses and elders and put him in a situation where he has to acknowledge that this is his legal responsibility to take care of Naomi and her land. And so I see Boaz here as a wise and clever person who has brought this situation to a head. He's gathered up this relative whose name isn't mentioned, and these elders who are passing by on their way to work and called a meeting in order to discuss what's going on. And so we're not really told the exact details of the situation, but what's likely is that Naomi's husband had sold the land before he left to go to Moab, and now Naomi has claim to the land, but doesn't really have the money to buy it back and pass it down to her generation. So someone would have to come along and do this work. And so people could use these laws to their advantage. And the guy who was her relative, he thought he was just going to get a bunch of land because Naomi didn't have any descendants. He thought he could get the land from her and absorb it into his own family, that he would pay off the land but get to keep it because Naomi didn't have any descendants at all. And so Boaz reminds him not only that he has legal responsibilities, but he has moral responsibilities to take care of Ruth. And suddenly everything changes because Ruth probably can bear children. And if she bears a son, that might endanger his own estate. Because if he doesn't bear a son to his own wife, then maybe Ruth's son, instead of his own son, would take over the land that he already has. And so now there's not only one mouth to feed, one widow to take care of, but there's two. And there's an assured opportunity that you're going to gain the land. And so the guy has already admitted that he has this legal opportunity and responsibility before these elders. But now he backs out of it. And Boaz has already given him a way out. He basically said, I'll redeem it if you don't want to. So he's already got him right where he wants him. This is kind of a checkmate moment in the story. And I think for Boaz, it's not really about the land. It's not really about his wealth. It's about acquiring a wife of noble character, which is a blessing all its own. Completely different kind of riches. So the guy isn't going to get what he thought out of this arrangement. And so in the long run, Boaz is going to acquire Ruth, just like she came and asked him to do. She came on the threshing floor and asked him if he would basically marry her. And he worked the situation. He thought this through and ruthlessly redeemed her so that he could have her as his wife. And so, we find ourselves, there's a great deal of debt in this story. And there's, I'm completely lost on my notes here. So anyway, so suddenly the relative isn't thrilled anymore about this obligation. He isn't thrilled about the possibility of taking on this debt and of redeeming back this woman. And so we don't get to see really Boaz's motivations very well. It's not a crystal clear love story. It's not really a Cinderella story like we want to read into it. There's a lot going on in this story. And we don't see what kind of risks Boaz is taking for his own family. We don't know if he's already been married or if he's a widower or if he already has children. We don't know if he's going to be passing on his family's land to this son that he has with Ruth. We don't really know all those things. So we don't really know to what extent romantic love is a part of this. But I think it's safe to assume that Boaz is mostly in this because he wants Ruth to be his wife. He was impressed by her character and her compassion and by her hard work, and he was impressed that she was doing all this and risking her own future to take care of her mother-in-law, Naomi, his close relative. And I think there are a lot of parallels between this story of Old Testament redemption, and the New Testament story that comes after this. This is one of Jesus' descendants that we're talking about, King David's descendants. And so we see in this Old Testament story the same sorts of redemption that we see in the New Testament, albeit in a slightly different way. We find that Ruth's redemption with Boaz is a lot like our own redemption by Jesus Christ. Like Ruth, we once stood in a situation where we couldn't do anything about it. We were helpless to save ourselves. And rather than it be the burden of poverty in our lives, it was the struggle of sin that separated us from our relationship with God and held us back to spiritual poverty. And now Boaz, like Jesus, his physical descendant, was moved to a shrewd act of compassion that pulls us up out of a desperate situation and puts us back on the rock, pulls us out of the muck and mire and places our feet on the rock in a radical act of compassion. When it paid our debts and restored our relationships and moved us in the right direction. And it's no coincidence that the early church had seen in this story hints of the gospel. And hints of the story of Ruth and her faithfulness and the story of Christ and the church. One of the main metaphors of the church is to be the bride of Christ. And so it's easy to read in this story and the Song of Solomon these same kinds of relationships between God and his church. So Ruth reminds us that God is a God who hears the cry of the outcast. That God is a God who pulls people up from desperate situations. And when they come before him boldly and humbly and ask for his help, that God is a God who responds to that need, just like Boaz did in this story. And it reminds us that God pursues us, just like Boaz pursues Ruth. So even when we have nothing in return, nothing that we can offer God, even when we're just hanging by a thread in a bad situation, God is there. And he's trying to help us, pull us up, and set us on the right path. And so you and I have been redeemed in a similar manner. God has made a way for us, setting up a new covenant for us that paves a way to our restoration. Redemption means, in the biblical understanding, to be bought back from slavery sometimes, to be bought back from something that you couldn't control yourself. It shows us God's hesed, or loving kindness, his mercy to us and help in time of need. And just like in the case of Naomi, there's something, this is something that we couldn't ask for, we couldn't do for ourselves. And God came on an all-out rescue mission for us and pulled us up, put us in a place where we could move forward with him. So as we go in this time of open worship, I want to challenge you with a few questions to think about your own story of redemption, how God has pulled you up out of the muck and the mire and placed your foot on the rock. So I have these three queries to challenge you with. Where do you see God in your own? Where do you see in your own story places you cried out to God for help and found your grace in time of need? What have you been bought back or redeemed from? And what signs or witnesses in your life remind us of God's radical generosity that's at work in your life? So as we go into this time of worship, reflect on these things. And if you feel moved to speak, please stand.